Welcome to Beacon Hill Update with Senator Jason Lewis. I'm Tom Dalton, the Senator's Communications Director here at the State House, and I think we'll dive right in. So, Senator, the legislative session just started in January, and you've been named to a number of new roles, including chairing the Joint Committee on Education and serving as Assistant Vice Chair on the Senate Committee on Ways and Means, which writes the budget. So I think the topic that's been on everyone's minds on Beacon Hill and around the state this spring has been education funding. And as the chair of education, you're obviously intimately involved with that. So what kind of work are you doing on the education committee pertaining to school funding?
Well, thank you, Tom, and thanks for tuning in to our legislative update today. I am very excited about the new legislative session, which has started in January, and excited to be chairing the Education Committee this session. And this is a very important, issue to all of our communities, that we fairly and adequately fund our public schools. It's been an issue that I've been working on, for a long time. In fact, it was one of the main issues that first motivated me to run for office about 10 years ago. And I believe that every child should have access to a great public school, regardless of their zip code. What we are doing right now within the Education Committee is we are talking to all different stakeholders from across Massachusetts, and I've personally been visiting a lot of different school districts and also spending a lot of time in our district as well, talking to students and parents and teachers. And we are evaluating a number of different proposals to fix the school funding formula, which is out of date and doesn't adequately reflect what our schools need to educate our kids. And I'm very hopeful that the Education Committee will reach a consensus and will be able to put forward a proposed bill in the next few months. And then we expect that would get taken up by the House and the Senate, and hopefully we'll get Governor Baker's signature. So we're working on a very aggressive timeline. Right. There's a lot of work to do, but this is super important, and we're very hopeful we will be able to get the school funding formula fixed and updated, and that will make a big difference for funding for schools in our district and across the state.
Right. Well, it's really exciting to see the Education Committee moving so quickly and so ambitiously towards addressing some of the needs of public schools in Massachusetts. So.
Yeah. Well, these are definitely long-standing needs that we have been working on for a number of years. So it's time to get this done.
Right. So obviously, any fix to the state funding formula is going to involve a pretty substantial investment by the state into public education, and many would ask, does the Commonwealth have the revenues to support it, and where is the money going to come from to make these major new investments? Do you have any proposals or ideas about where that money might be coming from?
Yes, I do, and the exact details around how much more money our state will need to put into public education, we don't know that exactly yet, because that will depend on the final legislation that gets worked out between the House and the Senate and the governor, what we're working on. But I anticipate that in order to meet the significant need that we see all across our state, that is going to require probably more than $1 billion of new state investment in our public schools. And that to give you a sense, order of magnitude, that's probably at least 10% increase in total. We spend about $10 billion between state funding and local funding, in public education. So this would be a very significant increase for our schools. How we pay for that, we're going to have a conversation about that. But one proposal that I'm supporting is what's known as the Fair Share Amendment. It's also often referred to as the millionaire's tax. And I have filed that as a legislation, essentially revived the proposal which did not get on the ballot last year for the voters to decide, which was very unfortunate.
Right.
But we've revived that proposal, And what it would do is for households that have an annual income that is greater than $1 million a year, they would be asked to, they would be required to pay an additional 4% income tax only on the income above $1 million a year. So this wouldn't apply to folks' assets. This is just income.
Right.
And we believe that this would help us to pay for the investments we need in our schools, and also to make higher education more affordable for students. And we would also be able to invest those new revenues to help improve our transportation system. So it's very important needs that we have, and asking our households who are the most well off and have benefited from the last several decades of economic growth in Massachusetts and around the country to chip in a little bit more.
Right.
For these very important needs, I think is a fair thing to do. So we're moving that proposal forward. It's going to take some time to get through the legislative process, and ultimately it would still require the voters of Massachusetts to make the final decision on that. And we expect that would be in 2022 in the election.
Right, so
that year.
Still very much in the hands of the voters at the end
Yes.
of the day.
That's right.
Well, we've talked a little bit about the state budget, but it's also April and it's tax season, and many people are probably thinking about their personal budgets, especially as pertains to taxes. And I understand you're working on a couple pieces of legislation that could, affect tax credits and exemptions for some folks in Massachusetts. Could you speak a little bit about those bills?
Yeah, there's actually two specific challenges that a lot of families are facing, in our district and around the state that I hear about a lot, that we are seeking to use refundable tax credits to help families to afford these costs. The first deals with childcare and preschool costs.
Right.
We know that is a huge challenge for many families, working families, even upper middle income families are really facing major challenges in paying for and finding affordable childcare and preschool. So what we've proposed is a refundable tax credit up to 400% of the federal poverty level.
Right.
So this would be not just for low-income families, but middle income. That would help to cover some of those costs of putting your child in either childcare or preschool. And in fact, we modeled this legislation after a proposal that Congresswoman Catherine Clark has filed at the federal level to introduce a similar kind of tax credit in the federal tax system. Obviously, what we're proposing would be in the state tax system. So that's one idea we've put forward.
Great.
And then the other idea is something we're working on with the AARP, and this would help caregivers. We know as the population ages, and also in terms of taking care of people with disabilities, that most people would prefer to stay in their own home, in their own community. And in order to do so, it's important that they have home care services, and also obviously many people rely on family caregivers, that it can put a financial strain on the family. And in fact, the average caregiver and family it's estimated that they incur expenses of $7,000 a year.
Wow.
In basically caregiver-related costs. Can be transportation, can be some equipment that they need to outfit the home, various things like that. So we, working with the AARP, we've proposed also refundable tax credit up to $1,500 a year that would help to, again, offset eligible expenses incurred by caregivers. And again, the goal is to help support caregivers and families when in the very important work of taking care of our seniors and people with disabilities.
Great. So really two different policies that would kind of support families on both ends of the age spectrum, right? From early education and child care all the way up to care for older adults. That's great.
That's exactly the idea.
So I know it's not these aren't the only pieces of legislation you're working on, and I know that you filed a great many bills this session. I think the latest count was something like 98 pieces of legislation. What else are you working on? What are some of the other major bills that you're taking on?
Yeah, well, there's, in addition to education, and we talked about fixing the school funding formula, there are definitely several other issues that are, really a high priority, I think, for me personally, for the state Senate, and really for Beacon Hill in general.
Sure.
So one of those is definitely healthcare. We know that healthcare, it continues to be a challenge for families, certainly for small businesses, for our municipal and state governments in terms of affordable access to affordable quality healthcare. One of the main drivers of rising healthcare costs has been pharmaceutical drug prices. And we've just seen some egregious examples, things like insulin and EpiPens, that have just seen huge price spikes. And so this isn't even just, brand new drugs that are being developed to treat, rare conditions. So I have filed legislation working with Healthcare for All, which is a great consumer health advocacy group. And this legislation would take a number of steps to try to better rein in pharmaceutical drug prices. It would make the pricing more transparent. It would take some action to put stronger regulations on pharmacy benefit managers, which are basically the middlemen in this industry, and would give our state mass health program and our insurers more control over the reimbursement rates for drug prices. So that's an important piece. And within healthcare, another important strategy we're pursuing within healthcare is to strengthen our mental health and addiction system in terms of both prevention, treatment, and recovery supports.
Right.
We're supposed to have mental health parity in Massachusetts, but we know that is in practice not the case, and folks are not always getting the treatment and the care that they need to deal with either mental health illnesses or addiction. So that's a high priority for us as well.
Right. And could you describe a little bit what mental health parity means to folks who might not be familiar with the term?
Yeah, so the idea is, and this really was a landmark law that Massachusetts passed about 10 years ago, was really that whether you are suffering from diabetes or you have a heart attack or you are struggling with PTSD or depression, there should be no difference in your access to treatment and care.
Right.
You should be able to have access to insurance. You should be able to see a provider. It should be seamless. And prior to that law, insurers would cover mental health treatment very differently from physical health. And so that law has made a big difference in moving us to that goal, but we still know we have challenges.
Right.
It's still sometimes difficult to get insurance coverage for the wide range of mental health diagnoses. We know that sometimes people have trouble finding providers who can take them on, particularly for child psychiatric issues, and it's a high priority that we address that.
Great. So to circle back a little bit to the work of the legislature, many people probably know that throughout the spring, the state legislators in both the House and the Senate are really engaged in the work of writing the annual state budget. And we're coming up on fiscal year 20, which starts in July. And I understand that you've been appointed to the Senate leadership of the Senate Ways and Means Committee. So what is the Ways and Means Committee doing at this point? What's your role in the state's budget process, and what are your priorities for the budget?
Yeah, so we're right in the thick of the budget process now, and it starts in January and kind of concludes in June, and then the new fiscal year starts July 1st. So certainly, we've been taking a lot of testimony from the public as we put the budget together. And I was privileged to chair several of the Ways and Means Committee hearings this year, and that's a great opportunity to hear directly from different stakeholders about what their priorities and needs are. And we heard some very powerful and moving testimony. So certainly we're going to try to do as much as we can for the needs of our communities. Certainly funding for public schools, which we talked about earlier, and the special education circuit breaker, which helps communities, not schools, with special education costs. Local aid, which our cities and towns use to help provide public safety, senior services, libraries, and so on, will be very important. We also are really prioritizing and trying to take further steps to strengthen our transportation system. We know we've got major challenges with improving service on the MBTA, including the commuter rail, also improving our roads and our bridges, things like the Complete Streets program to make it safer also for pedestrians and bicyclists and other modes of transit. There's a lot we are doing and a lot more we need to do to continue to strengthen that. So we'll be doing some of that in the budget, and also I expect we'll be doing some additional legislation this year. Another major priority area, both within the budget and also possibly separate legislation, it will be around housing.
Right.
We've got a challenge with housing affordability in our area. We've got far too many families that are barely hanging on, that are facing eviction, or that are even struggling with homelessness. And so both supporting homelessness prevention services and helping more families to afford their apartments or other housing options is a critical need that we have. And we have to take some strong steps to increase housing production, and particularly of more of affordable housing in our region.
Right.
So that's another area that we're actively working on possible solutions.
Right. So no shortage of things to keep track of, but it sounds like a lot of really important work being done. Like I said earlier, obviously you're working on a whole host of different bills and areas of legislation. Are there other bills that you've been working on that you'd like to highlight, or priorities that you've been thinking about?
There's a bill, for example, that we're working on this session, which is kind of a new issue for us, which is around ranked choice voting.
Right.
And one of the challenges we have is we want to make sure that our democracy is strong, that everybody feels engaged in the process, and that they have confidence in the integrity of our election system, both at the local, state, and federal levels. And we've done a number of things in Massachusetts in the last few years to address that. For example, we added early voting in a number of our elections, which has been very popular. We've also added pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds so that we can encourage more young people to get to registered and vote. And we also added automatic voter registration, which is a way to make sure that people get registered. So those are all good things, but we know we need to still do more. And so that's where ranked choice voting comes in. And it's a great system. It's gaining popularity. It's now being used in Maine. It's being used in some other parts of the country. But it applies when you have more than two candidates that are running for office. If you have 3 or 4 or 5 candidates, it's a system where you rank the candidates from first, second, third, and so on. And then if no candidate gets a majority of the vote in the first, when the ballots are counted, then the ranked choice voting kicks in to determine who gets the most, who has the most support overall.
Right.
And if our viewers will recall the election that just took place in Fall River,
Right.
Where the current mayor was recalled with 60% voting him out of office, and then he was reelected with I think something like 30 or 35%.
I think it was 35%.
And so that was a perfect example, kind of a poster child for why we need something like ranked choice voting to not have a situation like that take place.
Right.
But it's a great way to get more people to run for office as well. It encourages, certainly it's been shown to encourage more women to run for office, more people of color to run for office. It encourages, because there's less concerns about ticket splitting.
Right.
And it's just a better way and a fairer way to determine, who wins an election.
Right. Well, that sounds like a fantastic reform, and I think it'll be really interesting to see if it takes off this session. Like you said, it's a relatively
Mm-hmm.
new issue for you and your office, but it seems like a great initiative to undertake to strengthen our democracy. What are the other, when you spend time in the district, when you're at your office hours, for example, every month around the district, what are the issues that people are talking to you about, and what are the issues that you're bringing back to Beacon Hill from our district?
We've hit on certainly a number of them in this
Right.
conversation. Having strong schools that are well funded and our kids have access to great education, addressing concerns around affordable quality health care, good transportation, particularly in the greater Boston region. Housing affordability is another one. I think other things I hear and I'm committed to working on are continuing to support our downtown
Right.
districts in our communities. Our downtown business districts are very important to the vibrancy of our cities and towns, and it's been challenging, particularly for retailers. So many people are shopping online now. That's been difficult. So we have been doing things to try to help support small businesses and specifically our downtowns. And we're seeing results from that. We're seeing, for example, what's happening in Malden now with all of the
Right.
redevelopment in the downtown area, and that is creating a lot of new vitality and opportunity in the community. And we're seeing that in a lot of our communities. So continuing to kind of invest in local economic development and the local needs of our towns and cities is continues to be a top priority certainly for me and for many of my colleagues as well.
Great. And obviously, that's why so many of us live in the communities that you represent, right? It's all about the great access to local small businesses, the accessibility of public transit, the proximity to the city of Boston. So there's a great deal of good reason to keep those downtowns thriving, and it's great to hear that that's on the agenda for Beacon Hill.
Definitely.
Well, I'm trying to think what we haven't covered.
I think the other thing I would just add in the time we have left is, we really value hearing from our constituents, and I just want to make sure everyone knows that we want to hear from you. So you can always call at our office. You can email us. You can Facebook message us. Right? You can tweet at us. We have office hours. I personally attend. In each of the 6 communities that we represent, and you can just look on our website or call our office if you want to know when the
Right.
office hours are. But anybody can just stop into office hours. You don't need an appointment. I also try to attend a lot of events, in the district
Right.
whenever I can, and that's always a chance to just say hi and share with me, what you're thinking, and love to hear feedback as well. And some of those 98 bills that we
Right.
filed this session, many of those bills originated from conversations with our constituents about specific needs they have, challenges they're facing, and ideas that they have for, boy, wouldn't it be great if we could do X? And then we say, well, let's do some work here. Let's do some research, figure out if this is something we could do. Maybe look at what some other states have done, and that has led to some of the legislation. Good example was the child care tax credit
Right.
that we talked about. Came from a lot of conversations with people and the challenges they're facing. Looked at other options, did some research, and that's how we came to develop and file that legislation.
Right, and on the topic of the community, would be remiss if we didn't make a plug for our upcoming community conversation. So for those who may not know, for the last several years, Senator Lewis has held all sorts of different discussion forums around the 5th Middlesex District every couple of months, talking about different policy issues that are coming up in the state or coming up in communities. And the next one we have is on May 15th, and you're going to be discussing youth vaping and the real epidemic that we're seeing among young people of using e-cigarettes and vaping products. So are you looking forward to
Yes,
this discussion?
we've it's the community conversation series. I think it's been very successful. We've covered everything from improving public transit to addressing climate change, the opioid epidemic, school funding, a lot of issues. And one of those that's definitely on a lot of people's minds, particularly parents these days, is the rise in youth vaping, which is also called juuling, or it's youth it's e-cigarettes, and it's a big problem that our schools are struggling with. So we've organized this community conversation, as you said. It's on May 15th. It's going to be at the in the town of Wakefield at the Maricel Civic Center. And we're very pleased, we're going to have the Commissioner of the Department of Public Health, Commissioner Monica Burrell, will be joining us as a keynote speaker. And we'll also have somebody there from the Maura Healey's office, the Attorney General, talking about what they're doing to crack down on some of these predatory marketing practices of these vaping companies like Juul. And we'll have some student participation as well. So folks, anyone who's interested in that should look out for it on our Facebook page, or just call or email our office for details. But it's really important that parents and students and teachers really get educated, because unfortunately it is a real epidemic, and kids are vaping, they're vaping nicotine, they're vaping THC, they're vaping, sometimes we don't even know what they're vaping. So it's important we get educated and we all work together to address it.
Great. Well, we're looking forward to that, and we're hoping that some of you will join us for that event on May 15th at the Maricel Civic Center in Wakefield. I think that's just about everything, Senator, so I think we can wrap up here, but thank you for taking the time and for updating the people of the 5th Middlesex about some of the work you've been up to.
And my pleasure, and thanks for hosting Beacon Hill Update. And again, just want to encourage folks who to reach out to us at any time if there's anything, any feedback, any concerns, any ideas you'd like to share with us. Thank you.
Thanks.